You know that moment, that single, terrifying second, when the universe decides to pivot on its axis, and you realize your life is never, ever going to be the same again? Yeah, that moment for me. It happened under the blinding, unapologetic spotlight of the Sterling Hall Charity Gala, smelling faintly of stale champagne, and the kind of generational privilege that just feels heavy. I was just trying to clear a tray of half-eaten artisanal canapes, keeping my head down, doing the invisible dance service staff learns to do when this man, this absolute giant of entitlement named Alistair Vance, he just snatched me. I mean, he grabbed my arm like I was a misplaced coaster, right there in front of maybe 300 of New York's most elite, and he started this sickeningly smooth, venomous whisper. Look at this, everyone. Our little experiment in affirmative action is feeling neglected. Come on, sweetheart, let's see what that talent really looks like. And before I could even process the humiliation, he was literally dragging me toward the auction stage, shoving the $5 million Seraphim Stradivarius, the centerpiece of the entire night, into my hands. His voice, already amplified by the kind of arrogance that only comes with a billion-dollar tech empire, boomed across the silent ballroom. You wanted a shot at the big leagues? Here it is. Play something for your betters, and let's see if merit or melanin truly matters in this room. Man, the sound of his cronies laughing. It felt like being slapped across the face in slow motion. Phones already out, ready to capture the moment they thought I was going to fail, ready to make me the most viral joke of the season. The violin, it felt impossibly light and impossibly heavy at the same time. This relic of history, this piece of wood that had touched greatness, now pressed against the cheap, starched collar of my catering uniform. I just stood there, my hands shaking, my grandmother's medication, the very reason I was there, rattling metaphorically in the empty pocket where my pride used to live. See, you have to understand who Lena Hollis was just 3 hours earlier. Lena was the girl who tied her hair back in a cramped, cracked mirror of a break room, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been navigating spaces where she wasn't wanted since she was a kid. I was 28, and the Beaumont Conservatory full scholarship felt like a lifetime ago. Mendelssohn's E minor concerto, the piece that got me in, the piece that made me believe I could break the cycle. I had to sell the violin I played it on just to cover the emergency surgery. Dreams don't pay bills, but catering shifts, teaching private lessons, and pulling doubles at the diner? That's survival. And survival is what keeps the lights on for the only person who ever believed in me, my grandmother. The irony of the night was a gut punch, right? We were raising money for inner-city music programs, but the people who actually needed those programs were invisible, carrying the trays, clearing the plates. And Alistair Vance, he represented everything ugly about it. He built his fortune stepping on talented people who didn't look like him, then threw $5 million at this gala just to buy the right to control the narrative. He was late, of course, because punctuality is for people who need to impress others, not for Alistair. I'd been watching the Seraphim all night, this gorgeous Stradivarius, just gleaming on the stage. My fingers, calloused from scraping plates and scrubbing floors, twitched unconsciously, running through scales I hadn't touched in 2 years. It was a siren's song, a reminder of the greatness I'd chosen to sacrifice. And then Alistair struck. He'd been sending his appetizer back repeatedly, just for the sport of watching me return to the kitchen. They have no work ethic, no sense of pride, he'd loudly announced, ensuring I heard it, right before he dragged me up there. That's when I stopped shaking. Because that was the lie that hurt the most, that my existence boiled down to a stereotype he could dismiss. My grandmother worked 2 jobs her entire life. I was working 3. Work ethic? That man wouldn't last 5 hours in my shoes, and he knew it. So, I stood there, trapped, the lights burning my face. Alistair stepped back with this theatrical, sickening smile. Tick-tock, sweetheart. Don't keep the contributors waiting for your little minstrel show. And that's when I made my choice. Not just the piece, but the battle. This wasn't about Alistair Vance anymore. This was for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. I closed my eyes, raised the bow, and I played Bach. But not just any Bach. I opened the chaconne, that monumental, soul-searching piece from the D minor partita, the one that's supposed to be played only by the very best. And the first note. Oh man, it just floated across the Sterling Hall, a single, crystalline G-string note that didn't just silence the room. It felt like it sucked the oxygen out of every cruel laugh. My hands, they weren't catering hands anymore. They were the hands of a musician who hadn't forgotten a thing. I played with the precision of the Beaumont Conservatory, but with the fire of a woman who had lived the kind of life Bach himself wrote about: loss, struggle, and eventual, hard-won transcendence. Within 5 seconds, Alistair's smug sneer just completely fell off his face, replaced by this gaping confusion. Elena Petrova, one of the world's most renowned violinists, she was sitting at table 7, and she slowly lowered her champagne glass, her eyes fixed on me. She knew. They all knew. The waitress had vanished, replaced by a virtuoso. When the piece finished, the applause, it wasn't polite. It was a roar, a standing ovation that felt like a sudden, cleansing rainstorm. But Alistair, he couldn't handle it. He was a predator who just watched his prey transform into a dragon. Very impressive, he spat out, his voice laced with venom, right into the microphone. Anyone can memorize one piece. Real musicians don't just perform. They create under pressure. He was twisting the knife, rewriting the narrative in real time. Let's see if you can handle something that actually requires skill, something you couldn't possibly have prepared for. And that's when the truly cinematic, truly cruel moment happened. He pulled out a folded sheet of music, this ridiculous, theatrical flourish, and announced it. Mozart's Violin Concerto No. 3, first movement, sight reading only. But his malice was obvious. Under the bright lights, the sheet music he held up was ruined. Coffee stains blurred entire measures. Water damage made key passages illegible. It was sabotage disguised as a challenge. He was demanding perfection while deliberately making it impossible. Oops, he drawled, with mock sympathy. Looks like someone was careless with the only copy. But I'm sure that won't be a problem for someone with your extensive training. The room went silent again, a heavy, sinking feeling. It was a guaranteed failure. I looked at the destroyed pages, then back at his face, that calculated, triumphant sneer. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I calmly handed the ruined pages back to him. I won't need those, Mr. Vance, I said, my voice quiet, steady, carrying across the room with a new, terrifying authority. Mozart's Third Concerto in G major, first movement. I'll play it from memory. A genuine, delighted, and utterly twisted laugh escaped him. Petrova, the legendary violinist, she wasn't just watching anymore. She was studying me, and I saw the recognition flash across her face. Pieces of a puzzle she thought she'd lost forever were falling into place. The audience was beyond applause. They were in stunned, rapt silence, afraid that any sound might break the spell. The social media hashtags were exploding from violin goddess to hashtag classical genius. But the end of the Mozart brought something far worse than silence. It brought Alistair's final, desperate act. He couldn't accept defeat gracefully. He had to burn the house down. Stop this ridiculous charade right now, he bellowed, his voice cutting through the applause like a chainsaw. He was red-faced with rage. You think I'm stupid? This whole thing was planned. She had this music memorized, waiting to pull off her little sob story performance. Murmurs of doubt began to spread. He was planting the seeds of suspicion, the exact dog whistle accusation he knew would stick with this crowd. Look at those hands. Those aren't waitress hands. This woman has been lying to us, playing some pathetic con game designed to make us feel guilty for our success. That's when my catering manager, poor Marcus, his face pale with panic, appeared at the back. He knew a call from Alistair could destroy his whole business. Miss Hollis, please step away from the instrument and return to work immediately. The transcendent moment was shattered. I was caught between the music and the brutal, crushing reality of my economic vulnerability. Alistair smiled, sensing victory again. He leaned into the mic one last time. Back to where you belong, and take your performance art project with you. The real tragedy is that actually talented musicians from good families will lose opportunities to diversity cases like this. It was the final, toxic blow. The accusation that my very presence was theft. And for a moment, I was truly frozen. The silence stretched out, taut and ready to snap. But before I could retreat, before Alistair could claim his twisted victory, a voice cut through the toxic air. A voice with the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding the world's greatest concert halls. That is enough. It was Dr. Elena Petrova. She stood up, this elegant, imposing figure, and every eye in the room turned to her. She walked toward the stage, her gaze fixed on Alistair, and she began speaking, her beautiful Russian-accented English carrying clearly through the sound system. "I know world-class playing when I hear it," she declared. "And what we just witnessed was extraordinary by any standard." Alistair's confidence visibly cracked. Dr. Petrova wasn't some soft-hearted liberal. She was a legend. "Furthermore," she continued, "I know this young woman personally. Lena Hollis was one of my students at the Beaumont Conservatory from 2018 to 2021. Full scholarship, top 5% of her class." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Alistair went ash-white. This wasn't a diversity hire. This was a conservatory-trained virtuoso. Dr. Petrova didn't stop there. She pulled out her phone and held up a photo for the cameras to see. "Here is her acceptance letter to the Berlin Academy Fellowship, dated March 2021. She declined the position," she announced, her voice filled with both pride and sadness, "because her grandmother needed emergency surgery, and she chose family over the only path to glory. This is not failure, Mr. Vance. This is sacrifice." Then came the absolute final, unexpected blow to Alistair's credibility, delivered by the person who knew him best. His own wife, Eleanor Vance, stood up at their table. She was trembling, but her gaze was rock solid. She held up her phone, displaying a charity website. "Richard," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "The Harmony Foundation, the one I've been running for 5 years? The one that provides instruments to underprivileged children." She paused, letting the full weight of the moment land. "Lena has been volunteering with us for 2 years, teaching violin to children in Harlem and the Bronx, for free." Alistair's entire, poisonous narrative collapsed into dust. Lena was talented, certified, and she had been giving back to the very community he claimed she was trying to scam. Dr. Petrova placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "What you've witnessed tonight isn't a scam or performance art," she declared. "It's what happens when privilege tries to crush excellence, and excellence refuses to be silenced." The roar of the renewed applause was deafening. It was the sound of justice being served, and Alistair Vance stood utterly alone. But a cornered predator, man, they're most dangerous when they have nothing left. His face cycled through rage, humiliation, and finally settled on cold, calculated malice. "This is all very touching," he sneered, dropping his voice into a dangerous whisper that still carried perfectly over the sound system. "But words are cheap, and stories can be fabricated. If she's really as good as you all claim, then let's put it to the ultimate test." He gestured toward the back of the ballroom, where the small chamber orchestra hired for the gala was sitting. "Beethoven's Violin Concerto in D major," he announced, the challenge echoing across the tense ballroom. "Full orchestral accompaniment. No sheet music, no preparation, no excuses. If she can perform at the level you're all claiming, this should be child's play. Beethoven's Concerto. That's not a piece of music, that's a monument. It's one of the most technically and emotionally demanding pieces in the entire repertoire. Even seasoned soloists wouldn't attempt it without days of rehearsal." Dr. Petrova was horrified. "Richard, that's completely unreasonable. Even seasoned professionals wouldn't attempt that." "Then she should decline gracefully," Alistair shot back, his twisted smile returning. "But let's make this interesting. My entire $10 million donation against a simple public admission." He paused dramatically, ensuring every phone captured his words. "When she fails, and we all know she will, everyone here will acknowledge that merit-based selection is the only fair way forward. No more diversity quotas, no more handouts." The stakes were unimaginable. $10 million for music education versus Alistair's poisonous propaganda victory. "And if she succeeds?" Dr. Petrova demanded, her protective instincts fully engaged. Alistair actually chuckled. "If she can perform Beethoven's concerto flawlessly with a full orchestra, with no rehearsal and no preparation, then I'll not only honor my donation, I'll double it to $20 million. And I'll personally fund a scholarship program in her name." The entire room held its breath. The orchestra musicians, though, they weren't concerned with the drama. They were buzzing with professional excitement, already tuning their instruments. They knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime musical moment. I turned to face Alistair directly, the Stradivarius feeling like a weapon in my hands. "You want to make this about more than music, Mr. Vance?" "Fine," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. But when I succeed, not if, when you're going to sit in that front row seat and listen while I prove that excellence doesn't have a color, doesn't have a zip code, and sure as hell doesn't need your permission to exist. Then I raised the violin, nodded to the conductor, and the opening chords of Beethoven began. The moment the Stradivarius joined the conversation, it was pure magic, man. I didn't just play with the orchestra, I transformed them. My every phrase, my every breath, guided their tempo and dynamics. Beethoven's concerto wasn't just music anymore. It was a dialogue between the struggle of centuries and the triumph of the human spirit. The technical demands that should have been impossible became effortless. The notorious double stops flowed like natural speech. I was operating beyond technique, in that rarefied space where music and soul merge into something divine. Alistair's face, terror, complete, absolute, existential terror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. This wasn't a performance. This was a force of nature. The orchestra members themselves were transformed. They had played with the greatest, but they were being pushed to new heights by my leadership, my musical intelligence so profound I anticipated their every need. The applause that punctuated each movement wasn't just appreciation. It was confession, a collective acknowledgement of how wrong they'd been. When the final chord rang through the Sterling Hall, the silence lasted 12 seconds, long enough for everyone present to understand that they'd witnessed something that would redefine the rest of their lives. Then the building shook. The eruption of sound, the shouting, the weeping, it was a revolution completed. Alistair sat frozen, his $20 million promise the least of his concerns. His entire identity had been obliterated. Dr. Petrova embraced me on stage, whispering, "Vienna, Berlin, London, anywhere you want to go. The world is ready for you now." But the most powerful moment? Eleanor Vance, Alistair's wife, she walked straight up to his seat. In her hands, she held divorce papers she'd been carrying for months. "I can't be married to someone who would try to destroy something so beautiful," she said quietly, her words caught perfectly by every phone recording in the room. "This ends tonight, Richard. All of it." 6 months later, I walked out onto the Carnegie Hall stage. Sold out. The City Symphony Orchestra behind me. My grandmother was in the front row, surgery successful, funded by millions raised on GoFundMe, because of that viral night. The Stradivarius, the instrument of my revolution, now belongs to the Lena Hollis Foundation, established with Alistair's forced $20 million donation. We provide instruments and training to talent, regardless of economics. Alistair Vance. His empire crumbled within weeks. He became a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating people based on prejudice. And me? I raised my violin, and as the thunderous applause settled into an expectant silence, I prepared to play Beethoven's D major concerto. Not to prove anything to anyone anymore, but just to remind the world, one final time, that true talent recognizes no boundaries, and that sometimes, the most powerful response to prejudice isn't anger. It's excellence. And excellence, once unleashed, can never be silenced again. Man, I'm still processing all of that, even 6 months later. But I'm curious, when Alistair Vance challenged me to the Mozart sight reading, the sheet music sabotaged, and the stakes were that high, what would you have played? Would you have picked the Bach chaconne to silence them? Would you have chosen the Mozart? Or would you have played a modern piece to completely break the format? Tell me in the comments below, and let me know if you think Eleanor Vance was right to divorce him on the spot, or if she should have waited. Let's talk about justice, folks. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories about ordinary people doing the extraordinary. Thank you for listening.